Okay, thanks, Tony. Good morning, everybody. I'm going to call to order this meeting of the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission Summer Flounder, Scup, and Black Sea Bass Management Board. My name is Justin Davis. I'm the Administrative Commissioner from Connecticut and also currently serving as the chair for this board. So we're convened here today for purposes of approving state and region proposals for 2023 Scup and Black Sea Bass recreational measures. I won't go back over the process we've been through, over the last 5-6 months or so in detail, but just as a brief refresher, this board was most recently convened jointly with the Mid-Atlantic Council back in December of 2022, at which time we approved a 10% reduction in both coastwide scup and black sea bass harvest. For black sea bass, the board and council opted to proceed with regional conservation equivalency as opposed to implementing uniform coastwide measures. And for scup, the board and council agreed to reduce the federal possession limit to 40 fish and shorten the season to May 1st to December 31st. But as this did not achieve the full 10% reduction, board and council also agreed that states would further modify state measures for scup to achieve the full 10% coastwide harvest reduction. And then following that meeting, those of us in the states have been working with the recreational demand model. Big thanks to Lou for all his work with us on running all those options. And that brings us to the point we're at today, which is to approve the options the states and regions have put forward for scup and black sea bass. So moving along on the agenda, the first item up today is approval of the agenda. I'll ask the board if there are any suggested corrections or additions to today's agenda. And Tony, Tracy, just as a heads up, I'm going to try to manage the hands today and keep track of them. But if that's not working out, I'll call an audible and ask you to take that over. So again, I'll just ask if anybody has any suggested additions to the agenda this morning.
So Justin, if you're going to manage the hands, then I need to make you an organizer so you can actually.
Okay.
So hold on 1 second.
Well, actually, let's just go ahead and call that audible then, and I'll have you manage them. Sorry about that.
Okay, I can make you an organizer right now, which I will do so you can see them, but Adam Nowalski has his hand up.
Okay, go ahead, Adam.
Thanks very much, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, everyone. So with regards to the items on the agenda, I do think it's important that we have some discussion about Scup Waves 1 and 2, the decision that was made back in December. I'm not sure, given the time frame that we need for a lead and federal rulemaking as this would play out for 2024, I'm not sure if in your mind that discussion would be part of agenda item 4 or whether that would need to be considered as another business item. And then the second item, I'm just looking for clarity that I think we need to have some discussion on is if we've gone through this RDM process now once for the 2023 fishing year, or at least reaching the conclusion of that process. I think we've all got some ideas about how we can provide additional input and improve that process moving forward. So I'd like to just have some discussion as time would allow to discuss what that process might look like.
Okay, thanks, Adam. I think to the first point, discussion around the Scup Wave 1, 2 issue, I suspect that will come up under agenda item 4, so we'll play that by ear. If we feel like we don't address that adequately, I think we could get to that under other business. And for the second item, the RDM, I agree, and I would suggest that we try to discuss that under other business at the end of the meeting if time allows, if that's agreeable.
Very good. Thank you very much.
Okay, any other suggested additions, edits to the agenda? Okay, if not, we'll consider the agenda approved by board consent. Moving on, is there any suggested corrections or additions, edits to the proceedings from the March 2022 board proceedings, which were provided in the meeting materials for this meeting? Okay, not seeing any hands, we'll consider those meeting proceedings approved by board consent. All right, moving along the agenda, next up is public comment. At this time, I'll provide opportunity for public comment for any issues that are not on the agenda today. So to be clear, this would be public comment on items not including 2023 recreational measures for scup and black sea bass. When we get down to agenda item 4 and discuss scup and black sea bass measures, I'll provide opportunity for public comment at that time on that topic. So is there any member of the public on the webinar who'd like to make a comment on an issue not related to 2023 recreational measures? Okay, not seeing any hands, we'll move right along to our main agenda item, which is considering final approval of proposed regional scup and black sea bass recreational measures for the 2023 fishing year. And at this time, I'll turn it over to Tracy Bauer, who is going to give us a presentation.
Great, thank you, Justin. Can you guys see that all right? I believe so, but just want to make sure.
I can see it okay, Tracy.
Perfect, thank you. So I'll jump right into things here. So I'll first go over a brief overview of what we'll be talking about today. First, I'll provide some background. Justin mostly got into it, so I think that'll be a very brief slide. And then we'll get into some of the TC's decisions as they were looking at what management measures to propose and the models. Then I will walk through the proposed state or regional measures for scup and black sea bass. And then lastly, the board will consider the proposed measures for final approval. So like I said, Justin mostly covered this, that there was that December 2022 joint board council meeting, which concluded that scup and black sea bass needed a 10% reduction in expected harvest. So the TC agreed to use the recreational demand model for both black sea bass and scup to determine measures that meet the 10% reduction for their state or region and the proposed measures that will be put forward today. The reductions for the options provided in the memo are for only individual states or regions. The final total coastwide reduction for like scup, for example, can be calculated once all the states decide on their final measures. Because of how the model is set up, black sea bass measures that are input into the model affect scup reduction and vice versa. So the black sea bass and scup measures, you'll see them paired today when I present them, which is how you calculate the reductions for both. So as I just discussed, I'll be covering the proposed measures for scup and black sea bass together for each state or region, as each option with the estimated reductions has that particular black sea bass and scup measures associated with it. For all the measures I present to you today provided by the states, I will also show the status quo measures or the measures that were put in place for 2022. So I will start off with the northern region with Massachusetts and work my way down the coast. I will be discussing each of the northern states separately, and then we'll provide a potential preliminary reduction for the region as a whole for black sea bass and scup based on the options the states have selected to calculate those reductions. Although the proposed black sea bass measures may vary from state to state in the northern region, a majority of the options from the northern region have very similar scup measures. So you'll see shortly in each of the slides for most of the northern states. But for the for hire mode, the scup option includes a 30 fish bag limit for the majority of the year, and then a 40 fish bag limit from the beginning of May through the end of June for Massachusetts, or September through October for Rhode Island through New York. The private and shore modes have a 30 fish limit for the entire open season, with size limits of 9.5 inches for shore and 10.5 for the private mode. The scup season starts on May 1st for all scup modes in the northern states. So starting off with Massachusetts, for Massachusetts black sea bass proposed measures, most options kept the 16-inch size limit and lowered a bag limit for the portion of a year or for a specific sector or both. Option 1 increased the size limit by ½ inch, and a day or several days were added to the beginning or end of the season. Options ranged from a 10% reduction to a 10.4% reduction. And for scup, options ranged from a 7.5 to a 7.8 reduction. And I'll just spend a few seconds on the slide just so people can review if needed. So for Rhode Island, their black sea bass proposed measures achieve anywhere between a 10.1 and 11.7% reduction. For all options, bag limits stayed the same for black sea bass compared to the status quo. In option 1, the private inshore mode's maximum size limit for black sea bass increases by ½ an inch, and there are some tweaks to the season start and end dates. In the same option for black sea bass, the for hire mode keeps the 16-inch size limit, and the season remains status quo as well. The remaining 3 options involve increasing the current minimum size limit for black sea bass by ½ an inch. Option 2 also has a few tweaks to the season start and end dates. The seasons for black sea bass stay status quo in options 3 and 4. So for Scup, the reductions fall between 3 and 14%. There is one Scup option that is different from what I previously described on that first northern region slide, which can be found in option 4 with a 10.5-inch size limit for all modes, a 30-fish bag limit for private inshore and for hire, except for a 50-fish bag limit for the for hire fleet from September 1st to October 31st. So we'll move on to Connecticut, which provided 4 potential options. For black sea bass, one option increases the size limit by ½ an inch. The other options make changes to the bag limit for specific modes, like lowering the bag limit to 2 fish for private shore anglers or season, and keep the 16-inch minimum size limit for black sea bass. Black sea bass reductions with these options range from 10.1 to 14.5%. And the Scup reductions range from 1.6 to 5.3%. So New York provided 3 potential options. For black sea bass, one option increases the minimum size by ½ an inch. The other 2 either shorten the black sea bass season or lower the bag limit for black sea bass for part of the year. Reductions for black sea bass range between 10.8 and 11.7%. And for Scup, reductions range between 14.9 and 15%. So to calculate a preliminary regional percent reduction for both species, the northern states each selected an option from their sets of proposed measures. This was done due to the difficulty of calculating total reductions for every possible combination of measures from these 4 states. Potential regional percent reduction for both black sea bass and Scup for the northern region is shown in the table on the slide. The regional percent reduction may change depending on what options are ultimately selected by the northern states, as each option varies on the actual reduction, or the estimated reduction achieved. And I worked with Lou to calculate the 80% confidence intervals around the estimated regional harvest with this, in the case of Scup, the 9.6% reduction, and the harvest value for the exact 10% reduction falls within the 80% confidence intervals for this proposed or potential 9.6 reduction for Scup, as estimated by the recreational demand model. So moving on from the northern region to New Jersey, which provided 4 options. For black sea bass, for all 4 options, the minimum size is decreased by ½ an inch. Some options lower the bag limit from July 1st through August 31st. Other options keep the bag limits the same, but shorten the season in July and August. These black sea bass options achieve between a 10.3 and a 10.9% reduction. For Scup, the bag limit is lowered to 30 for all options, and the season is shortened, either so the Scup season starts in August and runs through the end of the year, or the season ends in mid-October, starting at the beginning of the year. And these options achieve between a 10.1 and 12.6% reduction for Scup. So for the southern states, Delaware through North Carolina, they provided 2 options for black sea bass. Both options closed the fishery during the middle of the year. One option closes the fishery from July 16th through July 26th, and the other closes the fishery from October 1st through October 9th. These options achieve 10.8 and 11.5% reduction respectively. And for Scup, the southern states lowered the bag limit from 50 to 40, except for Virginia, which will remain at 30 fish with no reduction predicted. So moving on to next steps. The board's next steps following any questions will be to consider the proposed measures for final approval. And I will provide more information on the board's options in the next slide. At this point, final measures do not need to be approved. The states and regions will need to notify ASMSC staff once the final set of measures have been selected, hopefully by April 1st at the latest. And then ASMSC will submit the letter with the final Scup and black sea bass rec measures to GARFO. So like I mentioned, the board has a couple of options for next steps when they consider the motion for today. The board may improve the range of state or regional options for 2023 Scup and black sea bass rec measures developed using the RDM, the recreational demand model, as presented today. This means when the states or regions are selecting their final measures prior to April, they must select one of the following options as presented today. However, they'd still be able to make small changes to the season, which would allow states or regions to add or subtract a few days from within the same time block that's in the RDM from the beginning or end of the season before final measures are selected. The other option the board can go with is a more flexible motion to approve the use of the recreational demand model to establish 2023 Scup and black sea bass recreational measures to achieve a 10% reduction of the RDM's estimated 2023 harvest under 2022 measures. This would allow the possibility for the states to make bigger changes to the proposed measures as presented today following this board meeting, such as changes to bag or size limits before final measures are selected. However, just keep in mind that this would require additional use of NOAA staff's time to complete more model runs. And if changes were made and you needed to run the RDM again, we need them to be provided to Lou all at the same time. So with that, I can take any questions.
Okay, thanks very much, Tracy. Excellent presentation. A lot of information to summarize there with all the options from the various states. So at this time, I'll turn it to the board and ask if there are any questions on the presentation. I see Nicola Meser. Go ahead, Nicola.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Tracy, for the presentation. I have one clarification about the Massachusetts options in the table that were shown, and also a question. So the clarification is that there was an asterisk in the Massachusetts options that indicated that some of those dates still needed to be fine-tuned, and the dates that were presented in that table are actually the fine-tuned dates. So I wouldn't expect any changes to the season dates that were in that table for Massachusetts. That asterisk was just there from a prior version of the memo where the model hadn't been run for all those options yet. And then my question is that there is a similar note for the southern region, Delaware to North Carolina, black sea bass option 2, where it said that the mid-season closure there might continue to be fine-tuned. And I'm wondering if that is also true or an artifact from a prior version of the memo. And I'm also wondering if the intent is for Delaware through North Carolina to all select option 1 or option 2, or they'd have the option of choosing among those 2 options for black sea bass. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Nicola. And I just saw Shanna Madsen's hand go up. Shanna, are you looking to respond to the question from Nicola?
I am, Mr. Chair. So to clarify a little bit on what our asterisk actually means. So what will be happening is the southern states will select either option 1 or option 2. There shouldn't be fine tuning with those dates that you see there. Thus far, right now, what the southern states are proposing is that Delaware, Maryland, and Virginia are going to select option 1, and North Carolina is going to select option 2, which does in fact get us to the 10% necessary percent reduction. So really the point of what we were trying to say there is just we might select either one of those options, but we'll ensure that the entire region meets the required regional reduction for black sea bass. And since I have the floor, I'll just note to everyone so that folks are kind of aware of Virginia's intent with their February season. We did open our February season, and so what we will do is we are going to go with the option 1, so the July closure, which means that we'll extend our July closure on either end to account for that February season. We won't make another mid-season closure. We'll just extend the mid-season closure that we select. So, and feel free to ask me any more questions if you have them, Nicola. I'm happy to help.
Okay,
No,
thanks for that. Oops, sorry.
Thank you. Sorry, Justin. No, thank you, Shanna. I just part of that question, you know, I think it speaks to the type of motion that we might want to approve here. It seems like the states have had an opportunity to fine tune those season dates, and so you know, I think that's something to think about when we talk about what motion we want to approve, whether it's approving the methodology or approving the options that are actually laid out in the document. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any additional questions for Tracy? Nicola, I see your hand is still up. Do you have another question, or is that okay, left over from before? Any other questions relative to the presentation? Mike Louisi.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So the question for Tracy, as far as workload goes, you know, something that we talked about in the southern region was the possibility of adding a few days to the closure to maybe address the increase in size limit from 12.5 to 13. Would that require Lou and folks from the service, would a whole new model run have to happen to account for that, or is that something more simple that can be explored still?
Hi, yeah, so, oh, sorry.
Oh, go ahead, Tracy. I was going to kick it over to you anyways.
Sorry about that. So if it's only a few days and it's within the same, at least as far as I understand, the model, you know, splits up the month into, you know, 2-week time blocks. And so if it's just a few days within that time block, it's basically a back of an envelope calculation of a couple of days of what that will do to the harvest. So the model would not need to be run again. It's something Lou would be able to do much quicker.
And Justin, just to reiterate, I think Tracy said this before, but if it's not in that time block, then it could have implications not only on the black sea bass measure reduction, but also the Scup measure reduction. Just keep that in mind.
Okay, thanks. Mike, does that answer your question? Mike, are you all set, Mike? Or I see your hands back.
I'm sorry. I had myself on mute. Yeah. So what I was saying was, I just anticipate the question coming from our stakeholders about whether or not going from a 10-day closure to possibly a 14-day closure may allow for a smaller bag limit, a smaller size limit, and I just wanted to see how much effort that would require. I obviously don't want to stress the analysis any more than it's already been done. I just wanted to have an answer for our public when they ask that question. But I think I got the answer I was looking for. Thanks.
And Justin, I would like to put it on the record that a change in the size limit would be a major change and has the potential to have implications for the other fishery. So that would be a big change and would not be allowed under one of the scenario motions that Tracy presented.
Okay, that's what I was looking. That's what I wanted to hear. Thanks, Tony.
Okay, I'll turn back to the board, ask if there are any additional questions on the content in the presentation. Okay, I'm not seeing any hands, so at this time, I think what would be helpful is if we could get a motion on the board to move us forward. I'm going to suggest that we deal with the two species separately, because I think that's probably the quickest and cleanest way to proceed. So I'll turn to the board and see if anyone would like to make a motion. I see Nicola Meser. Go ahead, Nicola.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll start with sea bass because I think that there may be some more discussion about Scup, such as was suggested by Adam in the discussion of the agenda items today. So regarding sea bass, I think we have a pretty full range of options before us. Each state has had about 2 months to work together as regions and work and request very many runs from Lou in the recreational demand model. I'm comfortable where Massachusetts is with our range of options to go to public hearing. Many of the states have already started that process, and so at this point I'm prepared to endorse or support the board approving this particular suite of options that have been presented as opposed to approving the methodology. I've raised in the past a concern about some state closures that were shorter than 2 weeks in length. And I think that resulted as a consequence of the board sometimes saying, okay, we're approving the methodology, and then the states sometimes came back with options that I don't know that everyone would have supported at that point. So, I'm much more comfortable approving the range of options that are before us today in the document. So my motion would be to move to approve the range of state regional options for 2023 black sea bass recreational measures developed using the recreational demand model as presented today.
Great. Thank you, Nicola. So we got a motion on the board. I'll look for a second. I see Jason McNamee. So the motion is seconded by Dr. McNamee. So at this point, the motion is the property of the board. Nicola, I'll turn back to you to see if you want to provide any additional rationale for the motion at all.
I think I jumped the gun and gave it up front, so I'm good to defer to the board's conversation at this point. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Nicola. And I'll turn to Jason McNamee to see if you would like to provide any rationale for the motion.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Really nothing to add to what Nicola said, so I'll save us some time here and not restate what she already said so well. So thanks.
Okay, thanks, Jason. I'll look to the board to see if there's any discussion on the motion. Adam Nowalski, go ahead.
I'm not sure that I oppose this motion, and I'm not ready to make a substitute motion, but I do think I would want to highlight that this is a departure from how we've done business in most recent years, where we've been approving a process as opposed to a particular set of measures that a state then has to go back and select from. And I think I would just ask for clarity, either from the makers of the motion or from staff, if that is in fact the case, that in this case, we're not just highlighting the process, we're actually specifying that limited set of measures.
Okay, thanks, Adam. Tracy, I'll turn to you to see if you'd want to provide a response there, and then also I could provide opportunity for Nicola or Jason to follow up as well.
Justin, can I jump in and just say that I think part of where this goes is that with this new process and using this new model, that there are implications when you make bigger leaps on the other species, which then has the potential to send everybody back to the drawing board. And so therefore, I think that a change in process is, acceptable. The board is wanting to go that way. It doesn't break the rules that we have in our addenda guidelines. So it's not outside of the scope of the board's decision to do so.
Okay, thanks, Tony. And to be clear, I think, this motion, were it to pass, does, and please correct me if I'm wrong, Tracy or Tony, it does limit states to selecting the options that they presented in the document that the board has right now. But there would be the opportunity for some small changes to those options following this meeting, as long as they're sort of within bounds that would not be expected to produce major changes in the reductions that are achieved for the for Scup, for instance. So to your point, Tony, if you change your black sea bass option enough, it can change the reduction you're getting on Scup. It can change the regional reduction achieved for a species. It sort of can have ripple effects beyond what the state does. So, but I do think there would be the room for some small adjustments to, for instance, seasons by a day or two following this. Am I correct in that?
Yes, that's correct.
As long as it's in that time block.
Adam, does that adequately address your concern and your desire to have some discussion on the record about how this process is different from what we've done in previous years?
Whether I'm not sure it rises to a concern so much as I just think it's important that we know. Obviously, an awful lot has changed here in what we've done this year. So I guess it shouldn't come as any surprise to anyone that we're continuing to change that as this continues to evolve. I just thought it was important to have on the record a recognition of this one additional change in case anybody's keeping track of all the things we've changed here in the last year in rec management.
Okay, thanks, Adam. Nicola Meser, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I could use a little bit more clarity on the fine tuning of seasons that could still be done. I know, for example, that if Massachusetts were to take a day off wave 3 and add it to wave 5, that changes our reduction more than you would think. And so I'm not seeing how that type of fine tuning, that was not really the intent of my motion to suggest that states could still do that. If you're referring to, however, like a 2-week in-season closure, that whether it's the first 2 weeks of a month or the second or the third and fourth 2 weeks of the month, that would be equivalent because it's all within the same wave. I think Tony made a reference to the same time block. I'm not sure what that means. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Nicola. Tracy or Tony, do you have any input? Can we put some bounds on what is acceptable under the sort of moniker of minor adjustments?
I think the original intent of the fine tuning, I think Nicola covered this earlier, but was just to get states, at least as communicated to me, was states wanted to get as close as possible to 10%, to a 10% reduction. Like if they're at 10.4, they might mess with the days a little bit to get to a 10.1. But as Nicola pointed out earlier, it sounds like states are in a better place now, at least the ones that she mentioned, that this might not even be an issue anymore. So it may not even be needed by anyone.
Go ahead, Nicola.
Thank you, Justin. So for the sake of clarity, the intent of my motion is to lock in the particular dates that are shown in the document for each of the state's options for black sea bass, because I believe that the states have already gone through that process of fine tuning to get to as close to 10% as possible. And that opening up this door here presents a little bit of concern to me in terms of what may be the eventual outcomes and the implications for all of us. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Nicola. And I think that is helpful to clarify the intent of the motion that you've made here. I think what might be helpful at this point is, given that clarification on the intent of the motion, if there's any state that's looking at this motion and thinking that would be problematic if this motion were approved and essentially would preclude any adjustments to the options that are presented today, to sort of speak up and bring that to light so that we can potentially make an adjustment here if necessary. So I'll just, ask the board if there's any state that views that as problematic to please speak up and let us know. Okay, so not seeing any hands. I think Tracy, you might be correct in your suspicion that that need to make minor adjustments may not be a thing anymore. So with that, I'll ask the board if there's any additional discussion on the motion. Okay, not seeing any hands. I'll turn to the public and ask if there's any member of the public who would like to make a comment on the motion. Please raise your hand. Okay, I'm not seeing any hands from the public. So I think at this point, given there's no desire from the board for further discussion, I'll go ahead and call the question. But first, I'll ask if there's any state that needs to caucus. If you do, please just raise your hand on the webinar. Okay, I see Rhode Island's raised their hand. So why don't we provide 2 minutes to caucus, and I'll try to keep that time here locally. Okay, that was 2 minutes. Does anyone need any additional time to caucus? Okay, not seeing any hands. I think what I'll do is ask first, are there any objections to this motion? Please signify by raising your hand on the webinar. Okay, just confirming, Tony, I don't see any hands.
Will you just ask for abstentions as well? I confirm though that there are no hands.
Right, will do. Are there any abstentions? Okay,
There's
no,
one. Yep.
Sorry.
No. Sorry, Justin.
So I see one abstention from NOAA National Marine Fisheries Service. So we'll consider this motion approved by consent with the one noted abstention from NOAA National Marine Fisheries Service. Okay. So one down. Now I'll turn to the board and see if anybody would like to make a motion relative to Scup recreational measures. I see Joe Cimino. Go ahead, Joe.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'm, with all due respect to the conversation we just had, I did not have an objection to that. But for Scup, I would like some flexibility, and it's a little bit more gauged towards the 2024 fishing season. So I would like to make a motion towards what staff put forward as that option B. So that would be to accept the RDM model for Scup. Yeah. And also, right, as I mentioned, I'm looking towards the 2024 season. And so I would hope that in this motion that we can ask the National Marine Fisheries Service to reconsider the federal waters closure. This is well, let's make the motion, and if I get a second, I'll speak to it. Thank you, Jeff.
Okay, Joe, would you mind reading the motion into the record?
Do
Right,
I
of
have
course.
the correct one up there, Joe, or?
Well, I would like if the reconsideration is, it looked like there was one with the reconsideration, so.
This one here?
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
So my motion, Mr. Chair, is to approve the range of, well, sorry, my motion would be to, I guess I'm going to have a hybrid here. My motion would be to approve the RDM. Oh, I see what we did here. So yeah, we can do this.
I can help you, Joe, really quick. Tracy, can you take the second half of this motion? He's looking to use the other motion and with the N recommend NOAA. Yeah. Yeah, take that and put it into the other one.
Thank you, Tracy. Apologies, everyone. So I would move to approve the use of the RDM to establish 2023 Scup recreational measures to achieve a 10% reduction of the RDM's estimated 2023 harvest under 2022 measures. Also to recommend that NOAA Fisheries reconsider the federal water closures based on the reductions achieved by the state regulations.
Okay, thank you, Joe. So we've got a motion on the board made by Joe Semino, looking for a second. Is there anybody who would like to second the motion? I see John Schoenig on the webinar with the hand raised. I'll apologize, John, not sure. Are you a member of the public or sitting on the board? Okay, I see a hand from David Borden, so we'll take a second from David Borden on this motion. So Joe, I'll turn back to you and ask if you want to provide any additional rationale for the motion at this time.
Yeah, thank you, Justin. I think for 2023 we're really getting into things, and I think states need to set measures. I do think that this is really a state waters fishery, and that with the measures that we're going to be putting in place, that once everything is aligned, that I think that that federal waters closure could safely be removed. And so that's my intent here. Thank you.
Thanks, Joe. I'll turn to David Borden, see if you want to provide any additional rationale or.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I seconded it because I wanted Joe to have an opportunity to at least float the idea and explain his thought pattern. But I'm curious, do we have anyone from NOAA on the call that could react to this motion in terms of their ability to affect it in a timely manner? Thank you.
Oops, sorry, I had myself on mute there. Tony, I believe we do have a representative from NOAA GARFA on the line today.
Yep, Emily Keeley. She's got her hand up.
Okay, thanks. Emily, go ahead.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So this came to my attention just briefly before the meeting, that there were some thoughts about reconsideration of that wave 1 to closure for Scup. So it's a little bit of a tricky situation because we've got, the joint action by the council and board recommending that closure to us. And so we're in the process of starting our rulemaking. So one potential avenue I could see forward is if the commission, with everyone on board, wrote us a letter during this rulemaking, during the open comment period, describing the concern and asking us to reconsider implementing that closure, and with that providing rationale and the data essentially to back up that these state measures will be sufficient to achieve that 10% reduction. As you all know, we, based on comments last year, reconsidered what we did with Scup for 2022. So we do have an opportunity potentially to reconsider that closure through that rulemaking. My other thought was if that couldn't be pulled together in a timely way within this potential rulemaking, if the concern really is 2024, which realistically is the case given this final rule won't be in place for a while. Maybe if it cannot be done right now in this rulemaking, could the council and board take some action at the August meeting, obviously with the appropriate rationale data, that something we potentially could do through the specifications rule, which would be in place before the January 1, 2024. So it's a little bit rambling, but I was a little on the spot. So those are my thoughts. I think that it is possible to do something, but we can't just do it based on this motion. We would need you know, a sort of a letter comment and sort of the information to support that. Thank you.
Thank you, Emily. That's helpful. Joe, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair. Just a follow up. I mean, New Jersey's really a small part of this harvest, and you know, there's a challenge of what happens in wave one in particular, since we don't have estimates, but we fully acknowledge the harvest, and we have ways, I think, to put forward something. So we fully intend to put forward something on behalf of and send to NOAA that acknowledges that harvest if January and February were open, and to take measures to kind of cover that for our reduction. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Joe. Adam Nowalski, go ahead.
Given those comments from the service, which I'm greatly appreciative, clearly they've given us a couple of paths forward, not just one, but multiple. I'd like to move to divide this question, Mr. Chairman, so that we can go ahead and address 2023 separately from what we need to do with the federal waters wave 1 and wave 2 issue moving forward.
Okay, Adam. So the motion to divide, I'll admit, haven't handled one of these before. Can you be clear on exactly what you're looking to do here? So split this into two motions. Would it be the first, essentially what we're doing with the RDM to address 2023 harvest, and then splitting off the question of recommending to NOAA fisheries the reconsideration of the closure into a separate motion?
That would be my intention, Mr. Chairman.
So Tracy, if you'll write up motion to divide the question. Motion by Mr. Nowalski. And then we'll see if we get a second.
Okay, so we have a motion on the board to divide this question made by Adam Nowalski. I'll look to the board to see if there's a second. I see Chris Bat-Savage. So we have a second by Chris Bat-Savage. Okay, so we've got a motion on the board with a second. It's now the property of the board, and I'll turn to Adam Nowalski to see if he would like to provide any additional rationale for this motion.
The rationale so that we can address both of these on their individual merits here. We had two pathways forward for the 2023 measures, and I think the question of whether or not how to recommend NOAA fisheries reconsider, again, they put forward two different ways forward. I think that's going to merit discussion. I don't want to see the question about 2023 get hung up in any way as we debate the merits of the wave 1 and or wave 2 closure in federal waters.
Okay, thank you, Adam. And I'll turn to Chris Bat-Savage to see if you have anything to add there.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. No, I think Adam covered it really well. Thanks.
Okay, I'll look to the board to see if there's any discussion on this motion. Not seeing any hands. I'll ask if, oh, I see Bill Hyatt. Go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I just have a question. I'm a little bit foggy on understanding how, if these two were in their original format and combined, how a recommendation to reconsider ties things up in any way. It's just, maybe I'm just missing something, but if I could have some clarity provided on that, it would be helpful. Thank you.
Thanks, Bill. I think I'll turn to Adam Nowalski, the maker of the motion, to see if you can provide an answer to Bill's question.
If there are concerns by board members today about whether or not we should recommend a reconsideration of that closure, and perhaps there are none. Perhaps all board members at this point in time are completely on board with both aspects of this motion. And if everybody's completely on board with both aspects of the motion, or if everyone's completely opposed to both aspects, then perhaps there's no reason to divide the question. But my sense is, given what we did with the black sea bass motion, I don't know where all board members are. If they want to go in the same direction with Scup as they did for black sea bass, with limiting things purely to the options presented here today, or whether they're open to just continuing to approve the process of use of the RDM. And I have the same questions on the side of recommending the reconsideration of the federal closures. I do not know if every member of the board here today is in support or not of that. It just seems to me from a procedural perspective, it makes sense to address these two things separately. But if it's not the will of the board to do so, then it won't be the will of the board to do so.
Okay, thank you, Adam. Nicola Meserve, I saw your hand up there, but it looks like it went down. Just wanted to clarify. Go ahead, Nicola.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I can support dividing the question because I do have some questions about the first part of it. Just to kind of address Adam's statement, I was more comfortable, I think, unless there's a state that really needs to continue to fine tune the measures that have been presented in the document for 2023 to approve the particular set of options that have been provided, so that we can try to wrap this process up in a more timely manner. That's all. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Nicola. Any additional hands from the board for discussion on this motion? Mike Louisi.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So the question I have has to do with the timing of the different alternatives that that Emily provided. So if somebody could help clarify for me, are we talking about, as far as the reconsideration from NOAA Fisheries, is that, I'm thinking about the timing of the closure, are we talking only about 2024? Or would there be is it possible that that reconsideration could occur for 2023? I'm just a little confused as far as the timing would how it would play out.
Okay, thanks, Mike. Emily, could you address that?
Yes, happy to. Thanks for the question, Mike. So we have not yet put out the proposed rule for the 2023 measures. So realistically, a final rule that would implement the closure, if that's what we were to do, is probably not going to be published until after the closure would be over. Because, correct me if I'm wrong, but it went through, the Scup fishery would have opened back up in May. So I don't think that 2023 is actually really in play here, given the timing of our rulemaking. So that's why I was sort of addressing 2024. In terms of what the states would need to do, we're still trying to achieve a 10% reduction for this 2023 year. And I acknowledge that it's a little weird because of the timing of our rulemaking. But yeah, so I think, though, if for some reason the final rule were to occur before when that closure, before the end of that closure, yeah, we would be sort of reconsidering that closure, I guess, for both years. We would essentially not be putting that in the regulations. Because really the problem for 2024 here is that we're not going to have a recreational rule done in time to sort of undo what we've done this year for the 2024 wave 1 and 2. So I'm sorry if that was more confusing than helpful.
No,
Sorry.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman. No, that was helpful. That's what I had thought. I think if we ultimately decide to divide this question or not, I think it might be helpful for the public and for all of us if somewhere in this motion, 2024 was mentioned, just to make sure everyone's clear as to what direction the board is suggesting. So I'll leave it at that. But thanks for the answer, Emily.
Okay, thanks, Mike. At this point, I'm going to go ahead and call the question, although I'll ask, oh, there, Adam's hand went down. So I will ask if anybody needs time to caucus. Please raise your hand if you do. Not seeing any hands, I'm going to ask, is there any objection to this motion? Oh, sorry, John Clark, I saw your hand go up there for a second. Are you saying that you need time to caucus?
I think it'll be okay, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. So I'll ask again, is there any objection to the motion? Not seeing any hands, I'll ask if there are any abstentions. I see one abstention from New Hampshire, yeah, and one from NOAA National Marine Fisheries Service. So we'll consider the motion approved by consent with 2 abstentions from New Hampshire and NOAA National Marine Fisheries Service.
Okay, Tracy, once you get that done, bear with us while we do so. If you'll pull the first half of this motion, so from move to approve, already, yep. And then let's put that on a new screen. So that'll be the first motion we'll tackle. And I believe Bob Beal can correct me if I'm wrong, but it becomes the property of the board and there is no maker or seconder.
That's correct, Tony.
Thanks, Bob.
Okay, thanks, Bob and Tony. So we have a motion on the board, move to approve the use of the recreational demand model to establish 2023 Scup recreational measures to achieve a 10% reduction of the RDM's estimated 2023 harvest under 2022 measures. I'll turn to the board and see if there's any discussion on the motion. Nicola, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to substitute to approve the range of state regional options for 2023 Scup recreational measures developed using the recreational demand model as presented.
Okay, thank you, Nicola. We'll just give a moment here for staff to get that substitute motion up on the board.
Nicola, some clarification just to make sure. Is that the first motion like we did for black sea bass?
Tracy, I believe, yes, it is. So you can just pull from that other slide. And once we have it up, Nicola, just let us know if there's something that's not correct in there. And Tracy, this will have a maker. Yeah, perfect.
Okay, Nicola, does this wording on the board match the intent of the motion you wanted to make? I'm seeing that Nicola's showing up as offline.
Yeah, I think we might have lost her for a second. Huh. Not sure what's going on. Because her mic is open, but I wonder if she lost internet connection. I'm gonna text her the call-in number, but we can, one sec.
Tony, would it make sense to maybe take a 5-minute recess here while we see if we can get Nicola back online and confirm this is the substitute motion she had in mind?
She texted me that she just lost internet, so, but she did confirm that she wants the same motion as the black sea bass one, which is what we have put up on the board. And in the meantime, I'm gonna try to see if I can figure out what the phone number call-in number is to text that to her so she can just simply call in.
Okay, so for clarity, I'll read this motion into the record. It's a motion to substitute, move to approve the range of state and regional options for 2023 Scup recreational measures developed using the recreational demand model as presented today. Motion made by Ms. Meserve, and I will look to the board to see if there's a second for the motion. I see Jason McNamee, so seconded by Dr. McNamee. And hopefully we'll get Nicola back on the line here soon, and she'll be able to provide some rationale for the motion. At this point, I will open it up for discussion. Mike Louisi, I see your hand. Go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman. I was raising my hand for a second. I'll put it down. Thank you.
Oh, okay. I see Chris Bat-Savage.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Just a question, probably should have asked earlier, but since we're on this motion, I think it's relevant. I just want to be clear that regardless of which option for the Scup measures is selected by the states, basically from New Jersey to Massachusetts, that those combined with what's proposed in federal waters will indeed meet the 10% reduction, or are there some combinations that won't quite get us to 10%? Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Chris. Tracy, I'll turn to you to see if you can address that question.
I believe so. Like if you're looking at the coast-wide reduction of Scup, it's going to be with the combinations. I've messed around with, changing up the New Jersey ones with what the northern region has provided. At least for the example, northern region, it would come out to be around 9.6%. It's coast-wide, sorry.
Okay, thanks, Tracy. Chris, does that answer your question?
I think so, Mr. Chair. So the 9.6 up in the north, combined with what New Jersey proposes, and then federal waters measures collectively would meet 10%. But if the northern states pick some other combinations to where they weren't 9.6%, would we still be at that coastwide 10%, or are we starting to fall below that 10% line? It's going to help me better understand how this is going to work under either motion that we do right now, and also when we consider the federal waters closure later on.
Okay, thanks, Chris. And for clarification, I think, and Tracy, correct me if I'm wrong here, under the substitute motion, there would be the ability for the northern region to select some other option other than what's been presented here today. But under the original motion, I'm sorry, I have that backwards. Under the original motion, the northern region could essentially develop new options, select different options after this meeting, because it would be just approving the RDM. But under the substitute motion, the northern region would not be able to do that. We would essentially have to select from the options that have been presented today. Do I have that correct, Tracy?
Yes, that's right.
So I think I'm taking Chris's question as, under the original motion, are there other options? And correct me if I'm wrong here, Chris, but you're asking if there are other options under consideration that could be selected that could then drop us below that 9.6 that we have under the options we're proposing currently.
I actually kind of looking more towards, I guess, the substitute motion on hand, where some of the options, depending on which state, you have Scup reductions, in the 2 to 3% range, and then others, in that 10 to 14%. do all the combinations, because Tracy showed example combinations that'll get us a 9.6 up in the north, but is there any combinations that are already presented in the north that won't, that'll fall less than that 9.6 and therefore could drop us back below 10% coastwide? Just looking for some clarification on that.
Thanks, Chris. I'll turn back to you, Tracy, but I believe, the northern region at this point is only proposing one option for Scup. Collectively, the states have all proposed the same option that as a region achieves that 9.6% reduction.
Yeah, we haven't calculated every single combination. If one of the northern states was to choose from within their, a different option within the options presented today. But I think that's something that we're going to, when everyone puts forward their final options in a month or so, we're going to look back and make sure that it is, somewhere around that 9.6, 10%. And if it isn't there, I mean, Tony can correct me if I'm wrong, but if it isn't there, we might ask them to select a different option or something.
Okay, I'll turn back to you, Chris, to ask if you're satisfied if that answers your question.
That's great, and I appreciate that. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Tracy. That answers it.
Okay, thanks. Tony, do we have Nicola back on the line yet?
Yes, hold on. She can open up.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Apologies, I'm not sure where I dropped out there, but it looks like you got the gist of the motion that I was trying to present. And my rationale largely was that very similar to black sea bass, that the states have had time to develop a range of options. To my understanding, there is not a state that is looking to offer something other than was in the document. So for the sake of clarity and moving forward with 2023 measures as quickly as possible, using what's in the document would serve that purpose best. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Nicola. Look to the board to see if there's any additional discussion on the substitute motion. Joe Cimino, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate Nicola's comments, and I honestly think that New Jersey would probably intend to move forward with the 2023 measures. But given the discussion we just had with Chris Batsavage's questions, I think the flexibility should be there for these options, and so I'm going to speak against the substitute and still support the original motion. Thanks.
Hey, thanks, Joe. And Tracy, as a point of clarification, the substitute motion, if it was approved as the main motion and voted up, would mean that states would have to select from the range of Scup options presented today. Under the original motion, states could also select from those options presented today or have the option to develop new Scup options after this meeting, correct? So it wouldn't preclude using the options presented today under the original motion.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, thanks. I just thought that might be a helpful point of clarification. Okay, I'll turn to the board to see if there's any additional discussion.
Mr. Chairman, I do want to sort of point out I guess one of the big differences between these two motions is that we don't exactly have a process identified for the main motion, or the original, I shouldn't say main, the original motion versus the substitute motion, because we are in this sort of new realm and new world, and the model has to be run by Lou, in addition to the fact that one set of measures for one species can impact the other species measures. I don't know, it is a little bit more of an unknown scenario under the first motion. It's not that it's not something that we can't handle. I don't want to try to get that impression, but we would probably, if we get to that motion, we will need to describe how that would work and if there are any bounds around that flexibility or not. It would be helpful for us, and we would need to establish a time frame so that we can make sure we can still get to the April 1st deadline of finalizing measures.
Okay, thank you, Tony. That's helpful. Okay, one last call to the board to see if there's any additional comments or discussion on the substitute motion. Okay, not seeing any hands. I'm going to provide 3 minutes to caucus. From Connecticut's standpoint, I need some time for caucus. So we'll provide a 3-minute caucus and then we'll come back and vote on the substitute motion. Okay, that was probably a little bit less than 3 minutes, but I'll just ask, does anybody need any additional time to caucus? Please raise your hand. Okay, not seeing any hands. We'll go ahead and call the question. I'll ask all those in favor to signify by raising your hands on the webinar. And Tony, if you could read off the hands on this one, that'd be great. Thanks.
Just waiting for the hands to settle here. All right. I have Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Delaware, New York, North Carolina, Connecticut, Maryland, and Virginia. I will put the hands down.
Okay, we have all the hands down. I'll ask all those opposed, signify by raising your hands.
I'm New Jersey.
Tony, I didn't get the total number in favor.
I'll read it out to you, Tracy. A second. We'll still need the abstentions, so we're not quite ready.
Okay.
One hand up here. Okay, went back down. All right, I'll ask if there are any abstentions.
We have 2 NOAA fisheries in New Hampshire.
Okay, any null votes?
No hands.
Okay, I believe the motion carries with, check my math here, 8 in favor, 1 opposed with 2 abstentions.
I have the same.
Okay. Okay, so the substitute motion is passed. That motion will now become the main motion. We'll just give a moment here for staff to reconfigure the board.
And again, Tracy, the same applies. The second half, no maker or seconder.
Okay, so the substitute motion is now the main motion. It's moved to approve the range of state regional options for 2023 Scup recreational measures developed using the recreational demand model as presented today. Adam Nowalski, I see your hand up. Go ahead.
Given that the range of measures that have been presented today in their sum equate to a 9.7% reduction instead of 10, Are we at risk of this not being approved by GARFO? And if the answer is no, does that signal to us that moving forward, now that we're using the RDM, we don't actually have to reach the full reduction, we just have to get to within the lower bounds of the confidence interval?
Okay, thanks for that question, Adam. Emily, not to put you on the spot, but would you be able to reply to that question?
Yeah, so I think in terms of just needing to exceed the lower bounds of the confidence interval, that's definitely not the precedent for what I think we're trying to achieve here. What I see here is that we've done our best to get as close as possible to 10. We're talking about less than 0.5%. And I, observed in the black sea bass measures, those aren't exactly 10 either. They're a little bit over the 10% reduction. So I think in the realm of, being reasonable, given the uncertainties and the challenges, particularly using this model that the species affect each other and that interplay and uncertainty, I think we've got to do our best to achieve that 10%. But I also recognize that it would be very challenging to get a model run to be exactly 10.00%. So, oh, sorry. So that, I'm sort of a little bit on the spot here, but that's my view of this. We're not trying to creep away from 10. I think we need to try to aim to achieve that. But I also recognize that there's, we have to be reasonable about what our actual capabilities are and what we can manipulate and change and how close we can actually get to that number.
And Justin, I just want to point out a semantics here. This Scup is different than summer flounder and black sea bass, where it is not an official conservation equivalency process, and it's not necessarily an approval of measures from GARFO. GARFO takes into consideration the state water measures when they are developing their federal water measures.
Okay, thank you, Emily and Tony, for those clarifications. Adam, does that address your question adequately?
I absolutely love the answer, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, great. All right, so I'll turn to the board and ask if there's any additional discussion on this motion. I see a hand from Nicole Bogan.
The member of the public, Justin, but I've opened up their line.
Hi, sorry. I know I'm a little bit late to the meeting, but I was speaking on behalf of my father, Howard Bogan, and I just wanted to ask a question as far as like your 10%. Will the amended proposal can you guys amend the proposal to a closure from March 1st to April 30th? Not that it's necessary, but delaying the season opening one day in May would most likely account for all of the Scup landed in January and February. Therefore, the season couldn't be closed March 1st through May 1st, and it'll be easily achieve the same result or more.
Okay, thanks, Nicole. I think what I would ask is we sort of put a pin in that question until we get to the second half of the motion we divided earlier, which has to do with the issue of the federal closure. And I think we'll have some discussion there that might address that question. Okay, so I'll turn to the board. I'm not seeing any additional hands for discussion on this motion. I'll ask if anybody needs time to caucus. Please raise your hand. Okay, not seeing any hands. Call the question. We'll see if we can do this the easy way. Are there any objections to this motion? Okay, Joe Smito, I see your hand. I'm assuming that's raising an objection.
Yes, Mr. Chair.
I'll also ask if there are any abstentions.
We have 2 New Hampshire and NOAA fisheries.
Okay, Tony, is it sufficient to note that the motion passes, noting the 1 objection from New Jersey and 2 abstentions from New Hampshire and NOAA National Marine Fisheries Service?
Can we raise the hands for yeses? This is the final vote, and therefore technically it's a roll call. So I just want to have it real correct on the record.
Sure, okay. So I'll ask all in favor of this motion to please raise your hand on the webinar.
And I'll go real fast here because I'm pretty sure it's the same as before. Mass, Rhode Island, Delaware, New York, New Hampshire, Connecticut, Maryland, and Virginia. And that is 8.
North Carolina voted yes. You said New Hampshire.
Sorry about that. Still 8. I was counting them in my head, but not out loud.
Correct, I have 8 in favor, 1 opposed, 2 abstentions. Okay, thanks. So I think at this point we've dispensed with the first part of that divided motion and we can move on to the second part. So I'll just give a moment here for staff to get the second half of that divided motion on the board. Okay, and I'll read that into the record. It's moved to recommend NOAA Fisheries reconsider the federal waters closure based on the reduction achieved by the state regulations. And as this was a divided motion, we don't have a maker or seconder for the motion. So turn to the board and ask if there is any discussion on this motion. Joe Cimino, go ahead.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. As others have said, I appreciate Emily's comments on this, and apologize to her for being on the hot seat all morning. But I just want to reiterate that New Jersey does, and even though we are a small player, we do intend to send comments to NOAA and to the board on any interest we may have in a hope to have a Wave 1 season in 2024, and what that would mean for the rest of our 2024 season. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Joe. Adam Nowalski.
I think it would be useful to clarify this motion, what exactly we're recommending. I don't think this motion as written is a motion to reconsider our motion from December as a board, which I think would also require some like action from the council at some point. My vision of this would be to follow the pathway that Garfo set out. Option 1 or step 1 as a result of this motion would be to write a letter during public comment using staff's input on justifying the allowance of federal waters to stay open. If that carries the day, then great, we can be done. But if that shouldn't carry the day, then I think what this is doing is saying that we're going to have an agenda item and request that the council do that in concert with us in August during specification setting that would seek to revisit it. So whether there's consent for that moving forward and just having it on the record is sufficient, or whether you need some specific amendments made to this motion, Mr. Chairman, I'll defer to your preference. But to me, this motion as written didn't spell it out. I've offered a way here, what this means, what it would mean to me, and I'll defer to you if that's sufficient or you want something in a formal amendment.
Okay, thanks, Adam. I think what you just described is consistent with the discussion we had and the input we got from Emily earlier in the meeting. From my standpoint, it's sufficient to have that discussion in the record on how we're going to proceed should this motion be approved. Tony, I'll just ask real quick if sort of you're in agreement there that that bit of discussion that we just had on the record about what'll follow after this motion should it pass is sufficient, or if we need to clarify anything in this motion to provide more specific direction to staff on what will happen after this motion's carried.
I think you've put it in the record. Unless somebody from the board objects, then we can move in that direction.
Okay, thanks. Mike Louisi, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chairman. I'm not objecting to the concept, especially since Emily painted the path forward and gave us a couple options as to how to proceed with discussions with NOAA about 2024. I just don't know, based on what Emily said about the final rule and the process that's currently ongoing, whether or not it would be, trying to think of the right word, does a letter right now, because by the time the final rule publishes, the closure is going to be over. I wonder if we would be better off spending more time preparing for and coming up with recommendations for the August meeting rather than providing that feedback from the board and the commission for 2023, since there is likely not going to be any. It won't matter, but I don't know as far as process goes whether or not just having that on the record at this time within the federal program would be beneficial for a future discussion. I'm just looking for some guidance here on. I just don't want to waste people's time if we're already through the closure before the final rule even is released.
Thanks, Mike. And I think I guess what might be helpful to clarify here, and correct me if I'm wrong, Emily, but what's really at issue here is the potential closure of federal waters in waves 1 and 2 in 2024. So we're sort of trying to figure out what would be the best path forward after this meeting to, provide a recommendation to NOAA Fisheries to forego that closure. From my standpoint, this motion captures the intent of the board, were it to pass, that we'd like to recommend to NOAA Fisheries they reconsider that closure. We've had some discussion on the record today about potential paths forward for that. I think there could be follow-on discussions after this meeting between commission staff, between NOAA staff, to sort of determine which is the most appropriate path forward, potentially including Mid-Atlantic Council in those discussions, and then sort of deciding on which track is the best to take, either the sending the letter after this meeting or defaulting to some joint action at the August joint meeting. So, that's just sort of my standpoint on that, is that we could vote this motion up, capture the intent of the board after this meeting, have some subsequent discussions on what's going to be the most productive path forward. I mean, would that satisfy your concerns, Mike?
Yeah, I want to make sure, as a member of the council, and we do have a lot of council members online today. I just think that this would be more appropriate being decided on by both the council and the board. In my opinion, I think it would be best served to just hold this, maybe even postpone this motion and have it as an agenda item in August for a full discussion by both management bodies. But that's just my opinion. I'm not going to object to it. I just think it's very vague as to what the next steps are.
Justin,
the way that it's worded right now.
Justin, could I maybe try to help a little? Maybe this will make.
Absolutely.
All right. So I think that there's sort of two things that you can look at this here. I think where I would want to make sure that we can work out with NOAA Fisheries is that we're not asking them to do a double amount of work. If there is a way that we can, in conjunction in working with the council, not to pull you guys out of the loop on this, but to not make NOAA staff do the double the amount of work in terms of dealing with 2024. Would like to try to achieve that. And just that, remember that in essence, we're trying to think about 2023 measures, but by default, because of the timing of the rulemaking, these wave 1 and 2 closures don't actually impact wave 1 and 2 of the current year that you're trying to get it to impact, but it actually impacts the following year. And so just talking through with NOAA about that, how we could achieve it, working with the council to make sure that you guys are in the loop and on board with what we want to do. If we need to make any recommendations, maybe it's possible that the council could address it at their April meeting. But if we can avoid double work for NOAA staff, I think that would be a goal I would try to achieve. But if it's not possible, then yes, of course, we could address that at the August meeting.
Okay, I'm gonna, oh, go ahead, Adam.
Me a minute to get off mute here. So I appreciate what Tony just highlighted here and not making double work on this issue, but I also appreciate Chairman Luisi's concerns as chair of the Mid-Atlantic Council to not act unilaterally here. I do wonder if, given the fact that the Mid-Atlantic Council has not yet noticed their agenda for the April meeting, wonder if maybe there were thoughts here about having a short period of time on that agenda where board members could join the discussion, whether you want to call it a joint meeting or not. I think if that might be an opportunity to have the joint discussion that Mr. Luisi seeks, and also tries to address the timing issue here to help the service out without doing double work, which would result by waiting till August.
Okay, thanks, Adam. Just to clarify, under your suggestion, are you suggesting that we should not vote on this motion here today, or are you suggesting the board should act on this motion and then subsequently convene a somewhat of an informal joint discussion on this topic at the April Mid-Atlantic Council meeting?
I think my preference would be to, because we don't know, we can't say with any level of, staff could chime in, or maybe staff could chime in here directly and say, yeah, we just can't facilitate a joint meeting, even with the board members chiming in remotely. That would make this easy. Then we have to address this today, in my opinion. Even if staff say we could allow the board to participate remotely, we don't have with 100% confidence that in fact this would show up on the MID's agenda in April. So to me, I think that calls for this motion moving forward here today, but seeking some formal communication with the MID, letting them know what we're doing here, and giving them the opportunity to include us in their discussion in April. And if the MID chooses to go in a different direction and chooses not to submit comments in favor of the proposed rule when it comes out, or submits comments in favor of it in opposition, then I think that would be their position. So that was long-winded. The short answer to your question is I feel this motion should still go forward today.
Okay, thanks, Adam. Tony, I'll turn to you one more time to see if you have any other remarks on this discussion.
I'm not going to say that the board can't meet with the Mid-Atlantic Council. We have not indicated that we were. We always can notice a meeting. But I just, I said this before when Emily was chatting with us, but as a reminder that we make these recommendations for federal waters when we're meeting in December to ensure that we're going to have some bit of reduction, because we don't know what the state waters are going to do, even though the majority of the harvest does come from the state waters. And if you recall in the past, sometimes we made those motions contingent on the states not doing anything or the minimum amount that the states would do. And so I think what we're trying to get at here is saying the states have put forward a set of regulations. We need to see what the final set are that are going to achieve close to a 10% reduction. And so therefore, what is necessary in federal waters to occur? Is anything necessary in federal waters? And that is the gist of why we would ask NOAA to reconsider. And so I think it would behoove us to go ahead and if the board wants to even potentially ask NOAA to reconsider, to make that motion today, and then we can carry forward with that, working with NOAA, working with the Mid-Atlantic Council to make sure we have all of our ducks in a row and we're doing the right thing for the conservation of this species and allowing industry to continue to fish. So that's all I have.
Okay, thanks, Tony. So I think at this point, we've had a pretty robust discussion around this motion. I think we should move to a vote. I'm going to ask if anybody needs time to caucus, please raise your hands. Okay, I see one hand from Massachusetts, so we'll go ahead and provide 2 minutes to caucus, and then we'll come back and vote. Thanks. Okay, does anybody need any additional time to caucus? Okay, not seeing any hands. I'll ask if there are any objections to this motion. Okay, I see a couple of objections, so why don't we drop back to doing this with the normal way. So I'll ask all those in favor of the motion to please raise your hand.
Just letting the hand settle. I have Rhode Island, Delaware, New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, and Maryland. I will clear the hands.
Okay, we've got the hands cleared. All those opposed, same sign.
North Carolina, Massachusetts. Oh, one more, Virginia, sorry. I will clear the hands.
Okay, any abstentions?
New Hampshire and NOAA Fisheries.
Okay, any null votes?
No hands.
Okay, by my count, motion carries, 6 in favor, 3 opposed with 2 abstentions. Okay, so at this point, we've dispensed with both parts of that divided motion. And I'll just ask if we have any other business we need to conduct under this agenda item. See a hand from Mike Louisi. Go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chairman. I felt it was important to move this forward, but that's why I supported it. I just want to go on record to say that I think you and I could work together along with Tony, Bob, and Chris and other staff to have this as an agenda item, not as an informal board/council joint meeting, but a formal board/council joint meeting. The next one that I believe that we'll all be in attendance will be the August meeting. So I have no problem with this being brought up, during a joint meeting, saying that the board already took action, and then get council feedback on that. But I do want to make the point that I believe it's really important that the council also have an opportunity to weigh in a formal way, and not just have a few board members speaking to the motion in some kind of informal setting, which I think April would end up being something like that. We are very close to having our agenda ready to go, and it's a really long shot to be able to put something like this on the agenda, given the time that it might take for discussion purposes. So just wanted to put that on the record, and you and I can talk, anytime, in the next few weeks to try to get something set up for sometime this summer.
Okay, thanks, Mike. That's helpful, and definitely imagine we'll be talking after this meeting to move that forward. Okay, so I'll just confirm with staff that we've dispensed with all the business that we needed to under agenda item 4.
Yes, I believe so.
Okay, before we move on to other business, I'm going to turn the floor over really quickly to Tony, who I think has some information to communicate related to the species that this board manages that we haven't discussed yet today. Floor is yours, Tony.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to clarify where we are with summer flounder. We've received a couple of questions, and so I just wanted to put it on the record of the process that we took. So in the end, we have status quo measures for summer flounder. No state will make any changes to their recreational measures. The commission utilized the RDM run that was presented to the monitoring committee, which put us into the box of allowing a potential liberalization because of the discussions that we had in December. It was agreed upon that there would be no changes to the summer flounder measures. So just wanted to clarify that. And then the other piece is that in the process of moving forward and using the RDM, and this being the first year, we've learned some lessons, had some questions, and the staff of the commission and the Mid-Atlantic Council agreed that we needed the monitoring committee and the technical committee, who are scientific advisors on these species, who understand the biology of these species the best, and implications of how we set these measures and the MRIP numbers. So we are going to have those two bodies get together late spring, early summer to go through the process, just to evaluate the process that we went through this year, make some recommendations on where we need to potentially streamline or set some requirements or guidelines on how to move forward. And we will bring those back to the council and the board for your review and consideration. So Adam, this may get at what you were wanting to talk about in terms of the RDM process. So that is our plan.
Okay, thanks, Tony. Does anybody have any questions for Tony about that information? Adam, go ahead.
Yeah, so I definitely think this is the other business topic I brought up, so thank you very much. I think the biggest area of input is when we heard back in December that there were some changes made to the model runs that affected their output, and some subsequent information we've gathered about that suggests that some of those changes may be preferential in nature and really a management decision as to what the right parameter is. So is part of the discussion that you're referencing here so far, Tony, would that include an identification of what those parameters within the model might be that could be part of management decision, and in the time frame you've laid out, do you think we have sufficient time for management to weigh in on those, understand the issues, and provide feedback as to what the right values might be for those parameters before we start running models in the fall?
We can do that, Adam, for sure. And I think that Kylie and Julia are on this line, and maybe Hannah, and they can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it's something that we have the potential to bring back to the board and the council at the joint August meeting, so that we can ensure that the process would be complete in time for specification setting in next year, or well, later in the year for this year. So I don't, Kylie or Julia or Hannah, if anybody disagrees, go ahead and raise your hand and I'll unmute you, because it's hard for me to find you on the list. And I don't see them raising their hand.
Hey, thanks, Tony. So sort of under a timeline you're describing, there would be a meeting of the technical folks in late spring or early summer to sort of hash out what the decision points will be in parameterizing the model for the 2024 measure setting process, identifying those areas where there will be a need for management input. That discussion would sort of queue up a discussion between the board and the council at the joint meeting in August. And then that would provide sufficient time, in your estimation, to inform the modeling that needs to be done to first sort of determine what reductions or liberalizations might be possible for 2024 and how the model should be set up to craft potential measures. So in other words, there's not a concern that by waiting until August to have a joint management discussion about model parameterization that we're not leaving ourselves enough time to set ourselves up for success for 2024.
Correct. I think we should have sufficient time to do that. And if council staff have a differing opinion, please raise your hand. And I don't see council staff raising their hand.
Okay, thanks. Adam, I'll just ask, you had suggested we discuss this under other business. Does that discussion sort of adequately capture what you think we needed to talk about today at this meeting?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. And with respect to the other business item you had suggested, which was discussing, the wave 1 and 2 issue around Scup, I think, we sort of had a pretty good discussion about the federal closure and the related issues under the previous agenda item. Are there any other, items there you'd like to discuss or, put before the board for discussion?
No, there were not. Thank you, though.
Okay, I will say, Nicole Bogan, I see your hand raised, and I did sort of say we would give you an opportunity to discuss when we got to that portion of the meeting, talking about the federal measures, and I neglected to do that. So Nicole, I'll just give you a minute here if there are some comments you'd like to make to the board.
Hi, yes, I just had a question. I used to work in pharmaceuticals too, and are you guys using model-based data or data-driven data? Because at least from what I've seen through studies, like I know it's a different environment, but the model-based data is not really as accurate. So is that what you guys are solely basing it on, or are you actually using data-driven data or just model-based?
I think, Nicole, that's a big topic and a huge discussion. What I would suggest is if you'd like more information on sort of how the scientific portion of our process works, I think commission staff would be happy to talk to you and provide some information on sort of how that process works. So I'll turn to commission staff to make sure I'm not, speaking out of turn here.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, thank you. Nicole, I can touch base with you afterwards, and we can talk more.
Okay, thank you so much.
And thanks for that question, Nicole. Okay, I'll ask the board if there is any other business for this board today before we adjourn. I see a hand from John Maniscalco. Go ahead, John.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. So we have management track assessments for Scup and summer flounder occurring this year. And unfortunately, black sea bass is another year or so out. So I'm just wondering, or I'm assuming we'll find ourselves doing this again for Scup and summer flounder, at end of 2023. It's unclear to me if we'll have to revisit black sea bass again as well. And then finally, I'm also interested in if we're going to resume looking at harvest control rule options other than the percent change approach. Thank you.
Thanks, John. Great questions. Tracy, I'll turn those over to you.
With the harvest control rule options, that's something we're starting to look at. We've put together a timeline which will be shared, not at this meeting. We thought there'd too much going on this meeting to talk about that. But potentially May meeting, timeline for that and the amendment. And I think we're starting to look at putting together, an FMAT and PDT and stuff like that. So that's all in the beginning stages, and that will definitely be picking up steam, especially the harvest control rule in the latter half of this year.
Tracy,
your other question, sorry. Yep.
Okay, keep going. Never mind. Keep going, and then I'll see.
I was just going to ask, what exactly was your other question, John? It was a little hard to hear you.
Sure. Sorry about that. So we have management track assessments for summer flounder and Scup. So I expect we'll be doing this again at the end of 2023. But I was also wondering if is black sea bass then going to be remaining status quo for 2024, or will we also have to revisit black sea bass?
So at least as far, someone else? No, okay. I just heard an echo, I guess. So as far as I understand, the last I heard with black sea bass and the delay in the assessment and everything like that, is that they're going to this year be put, I think, 2021, 2022 data into the past model to projections for specifications. So we wouldn't be remaining status quo. We would be relying on what the projections tell us. And then once we have that research track completed, we'll do the management track and get back in cycle with summer flounder and Scup.
And
but Tony, if you need to jump in, yeah.
I'll add to that in that I wish I could answer your question, John, and I think we should have a conversation with Mid-Atlantic Council staff and NOAA Fisheries to make sure we're all on the same page, and we can provide an update to the board through an email on what we will or will not have to do for black sea bass. But you are correct that Scup and summer flounder would fall into the evaluation timeframe due to the timing of the assessments updates.
Okay, thanks. Does that answer your questions, John?
Yes, thank you all.
Okay, Tom Foti, bring us home.
Yeah, I'm not going to make anybody happy, but I needed to say this after I've been sitting around listening to this conversation all day. Going out to the public, going out to the recreational community, and try to explain what we're doing at Scups and the cutbacks we need to take, even though the stock will be probably 20% under the overall quota, is not a good situation. I mean, we've been losing the trust of the recreational community and the commercial community because of us management of Scup and black sea bass, because we realize there's so many fish out there and yet we're not allowed to harvest them. But when we basically put restrictions on them and we know that the quota will not be landed, and we basically still reduce the fishery on the recreational community, that will cause pain, cause suffering, and loss of money to the charter boat, party boat, tackle stores, and everything else, just because that's what says on paper we're not doing our jobs. I figured I must put that on the record after doing this job for 35 years.
Okay, thanks, Tom. And I would say I can't agree with you more. I've certainly been having some very difficult discussions at home with our stakeholders about what we're doing with Scup and black sea bass, and I suspect it's the same for everybody around the table. And I guess what I would say is that we've been working hard to try to improve the situation. I do think the harvest control rule and the percent change approach was a definite improvement, but you know, to the public that's out there listening, we recognize the situation, and you know, everyone around this table is doing everything they can to work to get us to a better place. All right, so with that, I'll just ask if there's any other business before this board today. We're a few minutes over our slotted time, but not too much. We did okay. All right, not seeing any hands. I'll just thank everybody around this table, the virtual table, commission staff, Mid-Atlantic Council staff, and staff from NOAA National Marine Fisheries Service for all the work everybody put in to get us to this point this year. Thanks everybody for your hard work. Thanks for your time and attention today. This board stands adjourned. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Justin. Thank you, everybody.